very much. I just wanted to say before I start to speak, I put a blog called perdaily.com, Perdaily.com. I have about 675 posts on Per Daily describing what is going on, sometimes on a daily basis, as to what's going on with targeted teachers in Los Angeles and what I believe to be a purposely failed public education system. There's been some eloquent discussion today about privatization and talking about monetizing a $650 billion a year industry. But there's another purpose to the privatization of public education. It's to dumb down this country. In a democracy, we vest power in our people under a constitution. But if you walk up to the principal of an average school today and ask them when the Second World War was, they can't tell you. And I look out in the audience and I see mostly people my age, senior citizens. I see that we have a generation of students that have not been engaged. And while I enjoy allusions to things like the Donner Party, I realize that the vast majority of Americans, whether they speak English or Spanish, have 500-word vocabularies. And a lot of the eloquence that has been spoken of today is impossible to understand because we're living in the vision that George Orwell had of an Orwellian society where you take away people's words and their ability to understand. What motivated this in California is what we did in Berkeley in the 1960s. They don't want it again. And if you have a doctor that gets out of medical school and has never taken a history class and never taken an economics class and doesn't know a certain part of his body from first base, this is what you're getting in this country. But let's focus on, let me just promise one thing. I promise not to make this, the problem for me with talking about this stuff is you want to go out and cut your wrists when you're finished. It's depressing. I want to end on something that's positive, on something that we can do, and something that we can do that they don't want us to do. And my mantra is, if what we do and what we say can be ignored with impunity, then it's not worth doing. We need to be doing things that they have to respond to. But let me talk a little bit about what happened in 2004, and we have the documents to prove it. The Los Angeles Unified School District, the second largest school district in the state, in the country, did projections, and they realized that teachers, which make up about 87% of the public school budget, were putting the school in the red, because after all, it's a business, as we have heard, and that teachers who were hired after 1992, when their age and their years of service equal 80, they would get what are called lifetime health benefits. At that point, the school district would have to declare $300,000 worth of unfunded benefits to go along with the $13 billion worth of benefits that they already had. So that's number two reason to get targeted. You're either at the top of the salary scale, you're about to vest in lifetime health benefits, and my personal favorite is you're actually trying to educate students. This is a no-no. We have a system that is significantly, we are not resegregating. We are more segregated as a society, significantly more segregated. As Jonathan Kozol pointed out 10 years ago, when you went to the Bronx, there were only 3 white students going there. White folks don't want to pay for a school system that they're not using, and they don't support it. They don't understand because they're not superior. They don't understand the effect that it has on a society to push kids through school without any education. And of course, everyone's going to college, aren't they? Even though the total capacity of all colleges and universities in the United States is 30% of high school graduates. This is something that it's all rhetoric, it's all neoliberal rhetoric. No child left behind should really be no child left behind, because they are really setting these kids up for failure. I am a product, before I go off on the Los Angeles Unified School District, I'm a product of LAUSD. I'm a product of it during a different era, where it didn't matter where you came from. The value was middle class. It was nuclear family. If you didn't get it at home in terms of dealing with the poverty that our minority communities have to contend with, you got it in school. You identified with a middle class value. I learned journeyman level skills so that now, in addition to being able to teach social studies, I could teach welding, and I could teach a kid to be a certified welder in 6 months. Starting salary is $40,000 a year, but we don't do that. Everybody's going to college. We target teachers, and people use the expression rubber room. It's not a rubber room like a mental institution, but it does a lot of damage. Teachers are incarcerated in local district offices. When I was incarcerated in a Bank of America building that Los Angeles Unified rented 2 floors of the Bank of America building at Eastern Avenue and Slauson, and I looked around and there were 45 empty secretarial spaces. As a matter of fact, the vast majority of these 2 floors were empty. I told you I have a blog per daily, so I started blogging about the fact that the district was cutting salary and cutting clerical staff. At the same time, they were renting empty space. They were having bagel breakfasts for administrative wannabes. So 3 days after I was there, I told you my friend Francisco Arellano spent 3.5 years there. I spent 3 days. They came to me and said, Mr. Isenberg, we're sending you to your new site. I said, what's that? Your home. So they paid me to stay home for 8 months. And then they moved for my dismissal. Now, one of the things that they're doing is that the union is doing absolutely nothing to stop it. Because it stands to reason, if you enforce the collective bargaining agreement, hell, if you enforced LAUSD's own bulletin policy, it says you can only be housed while they're investigating for 120 days. So how do you keep somebody for 3.5 years? And what is the collateral effect, both mentally and physically? Because I don't know about you folks, but I think human beings are meant to work. And when you go sit someplace in isolation day after day after day, it has an effect. And putting out per daily, these people call me up. Out of the blue, teacher, 32 years a teacher, she's accused of hitting a student. The parents of the student say, oh, he says that all the time. He says his sister hits him. They do an investigation, no problem. The superintendent of the school district, John Deasy, says, I'm moving for her dismissal anyway. A teacher is doing popcorn reading, which is all the kids are reading and they're following, and to keep the students' attention, she says, I'll come by and tap you on the shoulder when it's your turn to read, and you need to be able to read where the other student left off. She's charged with child abuse. So you say, how does this go on? They've got all their ducks in the row. Whether it's mainstream media or NPR, which because of closed budgets is taking a tremendous amount of money from whom? Gates and Broad. And they wouldn't dare go against what Professor Diane Ravitch calls the dominant narrative, which is that it's all about bad teachers and charter schools will make it better. Well, how do charter schools actually do? Stanford published a report saying only 17% of charter schools do better, 47% do exactly the same as public school, and 36% do worse, but it's never reported in the mainstream media. I'll give you an example of the kind of story that you can Google. A woman named Barbara Jones reports for a paper in the San Fernando Valley that's syndicated around the state. And she reports to try to inflame people that it's costing $1.4 million a month to keep teachers, these bad teachers, in teacher jail. $865,000 to pay for their substitutes. Do you do the math? Let's see, that's 1.4 and 8, so that's close to $2,300,000 a month. But what they don't tell you is that when you get rid of 853 teachers last year and not one gets their job back, you save $51 million the first year because you replace a teacher that is at the top of the salary scale making $80,000 a year with one making $36,000 who doesn't have the benefits package that the other teacher has. This is about money. And at this point, I usually go into my Vito Corleone accent and I tell you, you know, you gotta whack your sweetheart because you're making too much money, and that's what it's about. You know what I'm saying here? You know, so you get Conan Nolan to show you why this dominant narrative is not contradicted. He is a reporter for KNBC. And you can Google at my site Per Daily. I have the video up. He's interviewing John Deasy, the superintendent of the Los Angeles Unified School District. And while he's interviewing him, he says, you've all heard of the famous Miramonte case where the teacher at Miramonte was giving certain parts of his bodily fluids on crackers to his students. And he did this for 18 years, and the administrators never noticed what was going on in this guy's class. So he says, Conan Nolan says to John Deasy, he says, why did you give this guy $56,000? He says, well, I'll tell you why I did it. He says it was to keep him from getting back in the classroom. What a great guy. Deasy, who is one of the 43% of all superintendents of schools, that is a graduate of the Broad Academy. This was February 13th. You can go online, February 13th, 2012, and you can listen to John Deasy saying this. I gave him his job back because I didn't want the chance of him getting back in front of kids. Okay, I'll buy that, John. But 1 month later, Phil Healy, same television station, has my friend Paulette Jackson on, who for 15 years was a special ed teacher, and in 31 days, they got rid of her. Who got rid of her? The daughter of a Teach for America, guy who sits on the board for Teach for America, a billionaire from Chicago. She has no master's degree. They hired her with 1.5 years of experience, and they bring her in as the principal of the school, and she gets rid of Paulette Jackson. So he's interviewing, and he starts out, he's done his homework, and he says, last year, they get rid of 853 teachers. None of them got their job back. Okay, wait a minute. None of them got their job back. But John Deasy told me half of them get their job back. Somebody's lying. Do you think KNBC ever pops that question? The questions that you used to get really good points for being a reporter was asking somebody, excuse me, sir, aren't you lying? Now we'll get you fired. The only people I know who are more afraid of losing their jobs than teachers are reporters. There are 5 corporations that control virtually all the media in this country. KPCC in Los Angeles, magnificent station, magnificently produced stories, but they have a filter. They will not bite the hand that feeds them, and Broad and Gates are the hands that feed them. I have been told by people who work at that station, we will not cover this story. There's a guy, Brian Claypool, after the Miramonte. He's an attorney. He's representing 11 of the students that were molested, allegedly molested, because we don't try people in the press, do we? You know, even Mr. Berndt is entitled to his day in court, but not according to the way that things are being done. So Claypool has a press conference, and I go there with a video camera and I turn it on. And for 22 minutes, the thesis of what Mr. Claypool said, it's about corrupt administrators and money. And until some of these administrators go to jail, it's not going to stop. You can, Brian Claypool, you can, Google. I love Google. You can go on YouTube and you can find, there it is. And you can go to my website and you can see the 22 minutes and you can see it. And then you see what the mainstream media reported. We're talking Academy Award. We're talking really excellent, well-cut, that has absolutely nothing to do with what this man is talking about. It just doesn't see the light of day. If the tree falls in the forest and nobody can hear it, it didn't fall. The vast majority of people want better schools. The district goes into Crenshaw and Dorsey high schools, inner-city schools, that have traditionally been destroyed, where poverty and race are the main factors. And what you have in communities that have never gotten the education, not after Brown versus Board of Education, not ever, is you have parents saying, well, I'm proud because my child passed, exceptionally, my child passed the California high school exit exam. My son could do that when he was 10 years old. It's a 6th grade level. So you have people who are so isolated in their communities, those kids are going to have to come out of that community and move into the mainstream and compete. And yet when you as a teacher go into those schools and try to hold those kids to the same standards that you were raised with, you are accused of being not culturally sensitive. Culturally sensitive becomes a synonym for dumbing it down, because if you educate African Americans, you've got to look at 400 years of incredibly shitty history. And if you look at and educate Latinos who come from a society that they had the zero. Europeans didn't have the zero. They had a magnificent, when did they get ignorant? When they got to this country. And when you educate those kids to their potential, what happens? You lose your cheap labor source. That's what it's about. The purpose of public education in this country is to replicate the existing social order, period. And you don't do it by giving good education. Now, where's the union? We have excellent laws in the state that say if a teacher is removed from the classroom under Education Code section 449.4, I'm entitled to a hearing within 60 days. No teacher gets a hearing within 60 days. They starve you out. How many of you, ask yourselves, if they came into where you work, they removed you from where you work, and they put you on unpaid administrative leave, because that's where you go after the rubber room. Your name is submitted to the board, and the board rubber stamps it. You look at the law, and the law says to you, you have to have a Skelly hearing, S-K-E-L-L-Y, a 1975 case that says pre-discipline, you have to be told the charges against you, and those charges have to be verified under penalty of perjury. My principal came into my class and had a pizza party for the students and had them write negative letters. 5 of the students in my class said, we like him. Can we write positive letters? Yes. When I got copies of the letters, I said, where are the positive letters? The assistant principal, Mr. Rene Martinez, said, oh, they didn't go towards the charges against you. I said, excuse me, exculpatory evidence is not admissible? He said, no, it isn't. This man is a moron, and this man is running public education. We have a name for people like this. They're called coconuts. And we have, see, the way we've made this system that is far more racist than it ever was, because one of the things about race, it isn't just white folks who do it. I am getting teachers calling me up. One teacher calls me up, he's from Sierra Leone, and I talk to him because that's where my daughter lives, and he says, very educated guy, he says, they're coming down on me because they think I'm a black man with an attitude. What's his attitude? He's educated. What's he want from those kids? The same level of education he got. You go into schools where Latinos have been traditionally put down, and now that you have Latino administrators, what are they doing? They're targeting Asian science and math teachers because it's too high a level. It's not just the racist system from the outside, but people have incorporated the racism so that in a black school, schoolboy is not a positive term. It's a put down. Education is not something that people are being taught to accept. A friend of mine teaches in Harlem. By the way, there's a guy named Jeffrey Canada there who picked things up tremendously. He noticed that when the kids were getting to school in Harlem, they had heard approximately 3 million less words than their more affluent counterparts. Where did he start? He started when a woman got pregnant. He made sure she was eating protein, less salt, less sugar, less fat, and hopefully not on drugs. And when you control the gestation period of a human embryo, then they can live up to their genetic potential. He also had a thing called baby college. He went into the community, he says, you can't hit your kids, you gotta read to your kids. 12 years into this program, these kids are scoring at a level of Westchester County, which is a Tony area of north of New York. That's an embarrassment. It doesn't fulfill the stereotype. But we're not racist anymore, you know, no child left behind. LAUSD has a $500 million legal defense fund. You try to stand up against them, they will hire the biggest and baddest attorneys in the city of Los Angeles. Somebody said to me, they do business directly or indirectly with about 60% of all lawyers in the county of Los Angeles. No one wants to go against them. They don't care if they have a good case. In the Janice Adams case, they could have settled that case for $1 million. They could have settled it for $300,000. They spent $1,300,000 over 10 years beating her brains out. It went all the way to the Supreme Court of California, and the Supreme Court remanded it after 10 years for a trial de novo. So you stand up against this district, you will be targeted. You will be removed. They will go around and they will trump up charges and they will put them against you. Do they have any charges against you? No, they just make them up. My principal, there's a woman named Vivian Etchen. She sits as the head of human resources. She signs your letter of dismissal. The law clearly says it has to be verified. She doesn't know anything about what's going on, nor do any of the people that are giving. She's sanitizing all these charges. Now, I didn't enjoy losing my job, but I taught for 23 years. I spent 7 of those years teaching comparative law in France. And the biggest tragedy for me is I believed in the American Constitution. I didn't think it was possible to keep me without a salary, without medical benefits, with no charges for 3 years. And I'm nowhere near some of the people who are now sitting. You walk in, you say, "What are you here for?" And the guy goes, "I don't know. I don't know why I'm here." Deasy gets up with another interview with another reporter, and he says, as soon as the Los Angeles police clear these teachers, we put them back to work. It's a lie. Once they start against you, it does not stop. They have gotten rid of, LAUSD's teachers have gone from 45,000 to 32,000. The OAH, the Office of Administrative Hearings, nobody wins in that court. Now, let me just mention a few other things. One of the problems that teachers have is that they're the purveyors of justice and order. And they have the hardest time believing, these teachers that call me up that have been targeted, they seem to believe that all they have to do is get to the right person and the nightmare will end. They believe in the system and they cannot believe that Vito Corleone is running LAUSD, but he is. It's about money. It's about building the Belmont School for $350 million on a toxic waste dump, but it's not a problem. O'Melveny and Myers, which had a conflict of interest and represented both the district and the developer, didn't have to pay anything because there were no damages. Why were there no damages on this irremediable toxic waste dump? Because we could put Latino children in that site, a site that a geologist said you'd have to build the building 16 feet off the ground in order for it not to be toxic. But that wasn't bad enough, so we tore down the Ambassador Hotel site and we spent $500 million building the RFK Learning Center with talking benches. The first thing they did, they fired 1/3 of the staff. This is about money. This is about business. Look where the money in Los Angeles comes from. It comes from the developers. In my school, we had $100,000 worth of trigonometry books sitting in the main office. There was not one kid in the whole school at Basic. What do we have $100,000 worth of? Well, these are vendors. These are people that are making money off of other people's grief. I promised I would end on a positive note. And a positive note, you got to lawyer up. I'm not sure that the whole legal system, when the previous speakers have talked about the fact that Arne Duncan, the state legislature, what is going on to facilitate, because I don't know any nice way to say it, the people running the school districts are morons. They're people who moved up by placing their nose in the derrieres of the people in front of them and not being bothered by the smell. And if you don't say anything and you play the game, you retire with a six-figure salary and you get to come back and work as a substitute. But you know, you're talking about San Francisco City College here. LACC, 60 to 70% of the kids arriving at that school are remedial. They can't read, they can't write, they don't have basic skills. But nobody wants to take notice of this and say where it's coming from. Legally, I am suing them in federal court for violation of the 1983 of the Civil Rights Act. If they don't have any skin in the game, they're sitting around having cocktails and say, I can't believe we're getting rid of so many teachers and nobody's standing up to us. If you stand up, if you bring them into court, if the courts are, and it's a big if the courts are not fixed, I'm not so sure about Superior Court in California, but maybe the Court of Appeals, maybe the California Supreme Court, hopefully the Ninth Circuit, but you've got to litigate. If you're going to litigate, nobody works for free. You've got to have fundraisers, you've got to raise money with the belief that every dollar spent going after them, they're going to have to spend $10 because the law firms that they have as the defense bar for LAUSD are getting $450 an hour. And you don't need $450 an hour attorneys to go after them. The other thing you have to do, you got to reconstitute the unions. The unions, by state law and by federal law, they're breaking all the rules. They're not doing what they're supposed to do. There is no way they could get rid of these teachers unless the union allowed it. Article 5 of the collective bargaining agreement of LAUSD says they can bring a unified action. Instead of bringing in unified action, they help the district isolate individual teachers. You go to them and you say, can you let the other teachers that have been targeted aware of the fact that we'd like to have a meeting? Oh no, it's privacy. Well, excuse me, I taught constitutional law. My privacy is my right. It doesn't belong to the union. The union can go to an individual teacher and say, do you want to get together with other teachers? There's strength in numbers. You can bring a unified action. But when you're making 3 times the amount of money you made as a teacher, when A.J. Duffy leaves being president of UTLA and the first thing he does is start a charter school, which he killed all the time that he was president of UTLA, something is rotten in Denmark. No, it's in Los Angeles, it isn't Denmark. So you got to go after the union. You've got to reconstitute the union. Union members are demoralized. They don't think, they sit around faculty centers and they sit faculty cafeterias and they say, oh, that's just the way it is, you can't change it. Chicago tells us something different. You can go school by school, you can organize. One very important thing is that when you're dealing, you know, my students and a lot of the parents who were my students when I got started, they might be ignorant, but they're not stupid. If you take Diane Ravitch, if you take some of the other speakers, it's not important if I can preach to the choir. What is important is if I can spend a weekend with working class, predominantly Black and Latino people, and in Spanish and in English, explain to them what they need to do. What do I think needs to be done? I think there needs to be a boycott. They live on average daily attendance. If kids reconstitute classes with retired teachers that they can no longer intimidate in churches, in Black and Latino churches, as soon as those kids don't show up in school, they don't get paid. That they understand. So you have to hit them in a way that they're paying a price. So that's another one. The media. I did a show on January 1st of this year at 5 o'clock on KPFK in Los Angeles. I would like to do a lot more shows. I had Professor Lois Weiner on with me. Lois talks about, and she wants to be called Lois, Lois talks about what it was like Where does this come from? This wasn't invented. This is a neoliberal agenda. The neoliberal agenda started in Chile when they overthrew Allende. The first thing that Pinochet did was he closed the pueblas. When you look at Cuba, whether you agree or disagree with Cuba, they ain't going back to Batista afterwards because they have a highly educated population. This is about dumbing down America. The money is important, but dumbing down America is just as important. So Lois Weiner is someone who can put it in a national, international context. But the problem is the level at which we speak at the university has to be spoken at the lower level, because I'm not smart unless I can communicate in Spanish and in English to the parents, and they need to be able to communicate to me. And we come as equals and we negotiate a third language. And the third language is better than what either one of us speaks at the present time. I go listen to Diane Ravitch. She comes out to Los Angeles to plug her book. She's preaching to the choir. She needs to be speaking in East Los Angeles. She needs to be empowering people, because unlike most teachers who will go into retirement they have the option of going into retirement. People who came to this country, like my grandparents came to this country for a better life. My grandfather was a bookbinder. His daughter went to the University of Chicago at 16. We are lying to our Latino population. We are lying to our black population. The message of America is you work hard, your children will be educated. We are not educating these kids. And in terms of one thing that somebody said, you now get a mortgage when you get out of college. You don't get a house, you get a mortgage. And you can't get rid of that by going bankrupt. It's not cleared by bankruptcy. We are creating peonage. And the last thing, besides Pacifica and other media through the internet, I did a webinar with Francesco Portellos in New York. Through Per Daily, if you communicate with me at perdaily.com, we can connect with everybody around the United States that is experiencing this. We are made to feel like the minority. We are the majority. By and large, we are far larger than anybody would know, because the mainstream media doesn't report it. They're too busy reporting a bear coming into Altadena, or somebody's cake didn't grow the way it was supposed to in the oven. Okay, and lastly, virtual commons. It was talked about that we need, that the school is the commons. We have the ability to have a virtual commons. You go to Edutopia or any of these sites, you can make comments about an issue that they put up, but we need to have a Craigslist for public education, where city by city we roll it out, where people can communicate with other people across platform and get their stuff together. My vision for public education, there is a Congress of teachers and parents. They elect the administrators. How long do you stay? Take a page from the Native Americans. You're the chief of this tribe as long as this tribe advances. If the kids are getting educated, you stay as principal. If the kid is not being educated, we're going to get somebody else to do it. But it isn't a top-down bureaucracy where the principals, where the students are watching the principals bully the teachers. Read Joe Scott Coe's book, Teacher at Point Blank, and watch specifically how women are treated in public education. It's abysmal. You can literally be told to go to your room.